Hello, everybody. Welcome to Paper Trails, and welcome to Papier. My name is David Balzer. I'm the associate editor at Canadian Art Magazine. We are one of the presenting media sponsors here at Papier. I encourage you to visit our booth, which is just right by the entrance as you turn left coming in, and from here turning right. So let's get started. I have here with me three artists, and the topic of the talk today is, in general, unconventional uses of paper with an emphasis on sculpture and installation. I'll introduce the artists to you, and then I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll get the roundtable going. So to my right, I have artist Dominique Pétrin. And to my left, I have the artist duo Seripop, Chloé Lam, and Yannick Desrano. And welcome to these wonderful artists. Well-dressed, rock musician artists. Okay, so I wanted to maybe foreground the talk briefly with a discussion of how paper has been used after the modernist moment in ways that veer away from the traditional use of paper, which is in drawing and sometimes painting. These are just very loose thoughts that I've cobbled together, but essentially thinking about the conceptualist moment and its use of paper, several things came to mind. The American conceptualists in particular were introducing what we now refer to as sort of dematerialized artworks. And I think it's really interesting that it was at that time that curators decided to employ paper to kind of rematerialize these dematerialized works. For example, the New York curator Seth Siegelab famously printed these beautiful minimalist exhibition invitations to kind of, as they say in the art world, reify Robert Barry's releasing of gases into the air. So it was in this moment that paper kind of took on the role of standing for the artwork. Similarly, if those of you who are familiar with the curator Lucy Lepard's work and her sort of index card instruction actions, it was really on the card itself, on the piece of paper, that the artwork sort of had a real tangible existence. But also in the conceptualist moment, which is, I think, related kind of to what Seripop are exploring now, we have artists such as, in France, the Nouveaux Realistes, who are, Christo and Jean-Claude, Armand, who, if not working with paper, are creating sculptures that have sort of a paper-like quality, crumpled, kind of textural, ephemeral looking, and then even in the US, you have somebody like John Chamberlain who is crushing cars together and making them look like kind of wads of paper. And I was thinking also, I always think when I look at Seripop's work of a scene in one of my favorite films, Blow Up by Michelangelo Antonioni from 1966. One of the famous scenes in which the photographer in the film, played by David Hemmings, is sort of wrestling with these two models, one of whom is Jane Birkin, and they tear down this blue paper backdrop against which he's photographing them, and they kind of have this erotic wrestle, but in this film, all the consequential as well as inconsequential actions result in the creation of a work of art. And here you have at the end this kind of big, sensuous, crumpled paper backdrop that seems to act as this really evocative sculpture. Moving ahead, and I think contextualizing what Dominique does, in the 80s, if we're talking about the kind of the rematerialization that went on in the conceptualist moment with papers and curators, in the 80s, there's kind of this emergence of a sort of a street vernacular, and of an installation style, and I'm just sort of pulling out random things, but people start taking the idea of posters being wheat pasted and using that to create installations. Barbara Kruger began to do that in the late 80s and early 90s. And of course, now we have a lot of artists who, for example, are designing wallpaper. Canadian artist Zin Taylor has designed a beautiful wallpaper pattern based, inspired by images of lichen. Other artists, I don't know, Superflex. There's a Toronto artist, Dan Bergeron, who also creates environments, wheat-pasted environments out of paper. So there's this idea of pattern renderings, which then brings us sort of into another concept, which is the digital, which is, I think, something that Dominique is also very interested in. So that's a bit of a sort of critical foregrounding for our discussion, and maybe now what we can do is explore these artists' works, and then we'll talk about some ideas around them. So maybe we'll start with Sari Pop, and maybe we can bring up a few images on the monitor. I don't know if you guys can actually see them. Can you see them? So why don't you just explain, in terms of your use of paper, what you basically do with it. And I should say also that if you haven't noticed, Sari Pop have a public sculpture around the tents. And I don't even know if it's actually using paper at all. But it's, yes. But paper is certainly not an exclusive, Sari Pop doesn't exclusively use paper, they work with other materials. So maybe you could just explain sort of technically what your practice is all about.
Well, yeah, it's kind of complicated. I think you got a good gist of it when you introduce our work and Dominique's work. In a way, a lot of our interest in installation and our involvement in material is informed by our kind of like the performativity of manipulating paper or installing, giant forms of paper in a gallery space. It kind of leaves this imprint. And
also the way that the paper deteriorates during its time of installation.
Yeah, you want to take that. So from that, this kind of creates this lexicon of forms and actions that then gives us a selection of, qualities that we're researching, not just in paper, not just in ways of attacking or applying these actions to paper, but also to other materials. And also it would inform the production of these of new objects using other materials, but that would leave an imprint similar to what can we learn from making environments or making forms and objects out of paper submitted to different material stresses.
When you come into, so if are you familiar with Sari Pop's work? Has anybody here seen it in action? So I guess I'm curious. I've talked to you about this before, so this is a faux naive question. But I walk into a Sari Pop show. What can you tell me about how it was made? Or alternately, you're asked to make a show. What's your process? How do you start?
Get the measurements of the room.
Yeah, you get a good plan. In inches, please. Well, there's many ways we approach it, but there's always a good time of planning ahead of installing the show, although we do reserve a certain space for improvisation once we're within the space. And that's something we are putting more and more emphasis on, this, especially on more recent shows, but I'll get to that a bit later.
But I mean, essentially we always start with printing on paper.
Yes, we do start with printing onto paper, and we try to divide the space with different color paints that will kind of isolate different phases of interventions. And on that, then we set up objects. We'll kind of link, these objects will link the whole Like, and so the whole idea is to kind of have a sort of, or present a sort of chain reaction within the space where those objects kind of seem to kind of deploy or unfold or fold into each other. And so, and each phase of these reactions is thus highlighted by those pane we set up. So for us, the gallery becomes this kind of receptacle.
Well, it becomes an extension of the studio.
Yeah,
I
and
mean-
an extension of the work. So we kind of claim the whole thing that surrounds what we put in. Oh yeah. Okay.
We can just we can go to Dominique now and have her explain her technique. Has anybody here seen one of Dominique's installations or her public work around the city? Some people, yes. Dominique, actually, a lot of what you could do could be explained by the shirt that you're wearing. But why don't you explain quickly how you put together your installations?
Yeah, the shirt is representation. Public. Okay. For me, how it started is I had my first art show in 2009, and I was displaying like traditional screen printed work, like 30 color like prints, and I was basically afraid of the white cube, and I hated it, so I decided to cover it up. And the idea came from this collective from Chicago in the 60s, the Arihu, and they were displaying their works into a completely wall-pasted installation. But it was just like decor, kind of, like they would just gather in garage sales random wallpaper and just display their works. So that's how I worked for the first art show, and I really quickly discovered that I was mostly interested into pasting directly to the walls. So that was my first and only traditional estampe show. And then I started to print all the elements, such as like patterns and whatever birds or images I needed in order to like transfer into a giant fresco. At first, it was more like really based on like Greco-Roman, these kind of display, like fake architecture. Like I'm really into like anything like simulating objects in paper, objects, architecture. And I mean, this comes from a long time ago from my band, like George, where we would like print fake, just print out of paper costumes, print out of papers like posters, everything printed. And so it kind of, I just stayed in this idea of like creating a fake marble, fake textures. And, but the idea of pasting on the walls, like I slowly, it became more like an optical experience more than a fresco in itself. And I was more into what is the effect on the body, because as much as I was doing punk music, like this, the impact of my installation were really on a physical level first. So I started exploring more that, and really the display was something that I was exploring more also, like all form of display, like the musical, the Muppet Show, the shopping mall displays, casinos, pinball machines, all these like variety, like panel, like church displays, like all form of displays like are really represented into my work, like this fake architecture, fake perspective, fake trompe-l'œil, mise en abîme. So, and yeah, but when developing those installations, I realized also it was, it felt like a digital video, like a video game, an 8-bit game, which is something I didn't really, it just came by accident. So I decided to go more there, so just more working with this idea of pixelated images. So the patterns were more and more getting, I would creating more patterns with Photoshop, digital pixels. And and kind of like doing these like display windows where like all we live in, like the 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 way like a screen is displayed, like the windows, our whole life now is involved with like these emoticon language. So more and more it became more as a Greco-Roman whatever variety show display kitschy, became more like a really a like a digital, like I wanted to make it more digital. And yeah, so yeah, and using references to like our everyday life into like online dating, Grinder, like all Facebook, like emoticon, like all this language that we use every day. They kind of like structure our imagination, and they're part of how we perceive the world, and how it generates also our dreams and whatever, like all our imagination somehow.
That's a good segue because I want to ask both of you, all of you. There's an immersive quality to what you do, as well as, you know, as you were saying, Chloe, it being an extension of studio work. There's also that experience that the viewer has of being sort of kind of disoriented when they walk into your installations. Somebody online I found described your work as walking into a GIF. And the other thing that I'm interested in, obviously, is like the strong psychedelic qualities of what both of you guys are doing. So what do you think your relationship is then in creating this kind of like mind-altering space, or just in mind alteration in general?
Well, the interest in, well, it's kind of twofold. The interest in getting involved into making immersive spaces is mostly directed with our desire to really kind of impose like a direct reading of the work to the viewer. You know, basically by kind of entering a space that you can't get around but just being into it and having to read it. So I guess there's something, you know, a bit of like of us imposing our will, but at the same time we feel it's kind of just ingrained. It's just part of installation practice, and we're just kind of try to exploit it to its a bit maximal aspect.
Or exaggerate it. I mean, I think for us a big important part of the immersive aspect of our work is to put in roadblocks, so to speak, within the installations, so that if people want to see the entire work, they have to proceed in an awkward way, step on things that will get wrecked, you know, kind of contort themselves a bit. So it's, you know, it's really left as an option, like whether or not you want to get in.
And the use of paper leads to kind of a display of a certain self-awareness of our own intervention within the space, because as opposite to just, let's say, painting those patterns onto the wall, when you go and glue paper on the surfaces, well, there is a visual separation, and then you have this, you know, the patterning, or you see the paints kind of repeating back and forth, like the paints that will compose whatever the murals are.
Lines that don't line up. I think that's an interest that we share with Dominique, is like really highlighting the artifice of the space.
And at the same time, there's a strong link with architecture and history of architecture. Think of Russian architects who were called, you know, like doing the paper architecture, for instance. You know, those kind of dream spaces that never got built, where, you know, in our installations there are, you know, half realized in the way that they are ephemeral. They will, you know, have a lifespan, and they are kind of crafted to the space they sit within. You know, despite the fact that they could, let's say, potentially be reproduced from space to space, but each space being different where they will be reproduced will impose its own syntax that will then change the work in a small ways or big ways.
I kind of also like put a big emphasis on the fact that is completely over the top labor wise, and it's vain, it's disposable, you cannot acquire it, and it just disappears. I like it as an event because even if you document it, it's not the same as being in space. Like this, probably this, like the same kind of feeling as experiencing a performance. Like looking at the documentation of a performance is the most boring thing. So like the live thing is just like it just grabs you, and you just kind of prisoner of the experience, and the fact that you just throw it after. I exaggerate that a lot. Yeah.
What I think is that maybe there's a difference between your approaches in that you see a lot of improvisation or like action sculpture going on in what you do, but I imagine sometimes when you install it could you might lose your mind a little bit in terms of being detail oriented. Are you dealing with renderings that you're trying to actualize, or is there for you also an element of improvisation when you're setting up?
All my installations are improvised except the ones on buildings because it involves a lot of money and people and permits and whatever. But mostly all my installation, I come with like 5,000 sheets of paper that I lay on the floor and I basically improvise inside. Yeah.
So maybe we could touch on then what you were saying about how it's using paper for you, and obviously for you guys too, is like a performance, and that it's very ephemeral. So maybe you guys can both talk about the ephemeral qualities of your work. What happens to your installations when they're done?
Well, a lot of what happens to our installations is that it gets thrown out. But also what happens to it can be seen at Hugues Charbonneau's booth. We have been, in the past couple of years, really working hard and finding ways to like recuperate our work and redeploy it in different ways. Like take the like ripped up sheets that we've pulled off the wall, and then like present this like torn up piece as a different work, or just kind of cut things up as raw ingredients and then rebake them. But I mean, it's still a very ephemeral process because what was there is no longer.
Also, I mean, in its first presentation or in like further presentation, like a given piece might or will definitely settle in time. It being paper, like giving it a shape. You have this imprint like from let's say your body or the performance of installing, but also just, let's say within like the month or the 2 months or 3 months installation exists.
It becomes like sad.
Yeah, it becomes sad. It sags down. Also,
Are you sad when your installation disappear?
no, it's great.
Me too.
Actually,
It's joyful. It's joyful.
well, in many,
No, the joy of waste.
it's been a couple of times where we actually set up, and we really liked the idea of kind of exploiting that feature, as the idea of kind of provoke like failure. I don't know if it would be the right term. Kind of set up decay, where you kind of lose control on how things will evolve and how the look of it will become. But it's it's the work it's like this material that becomes alive. The material then shows a performativity, and as the artist, like your only action was to kind of set up that and wait for an action or a reaction. In a work that we implemented 2 years ago, titled Avance en arrière, which is still up right now. We covered a building with screen printed paper and just kind of led it to the elements and just waited for its decay, and the process still happening at this point.
But the whole point was that the building was set to be demolished. Yeah. So the wrecking ball is the end of the. But I mean, recently we had a show in Vancouver, where on the opening night it was pouring rain, and the curator comes in with her child in the baby carriage, and the tires are like soaking wet, and everything got all messed up like before the opening started, and it was seriously the most exciting thing that happened that week, because it was just like, oh, what the fuck, like, oh, but this is actually pretty cool.
And it's interesting because at the same time, there's these kind of preconceived notions that we have when we approach a work like that or when we implement it, because there's a certain attachment you have in setting the work and then kind of going for a certain aspect. And having a background in printmaking, you kind of you kind of you look for details and you kind of set up things really nicely, and you have those kind of conventions like often your own conventions you try to set up and then follow, especially when it comes to installing this work.
But then you learn to like embrace the frustration.
So so you're kind of playing with your own anxieties, and there's this learning experience process that we're still going through. And you know what I still, let's say, put those works in gallery, let's say, where we invite people to just kind of walk on and just kind of live within. And then those work kind of get destroyed after a couple months, and we're just we feel nervous about it, but ultimately or initially we do know this is what's going to happen, so this tension, we find it really there's something really fresh about it, and it's like kind of playing with our own kind of knowledge about our own work. So there's something really challenging in this kind of insecurity that we're potentially putting at play.
Do you want to say anything about striking your work and what life your work has after the installation's over?
Well, if ideally, like, if I had a bit more money in a storage unit, I would just keep all the garbage bags with the paper once it's taken off. So when I have a retrospective in 50 years, I can just display all the muddy paper, like, as that would be the retrospective. Yeah.
So this is all fun and iconoclastic and bohemian work, but what are some of the challenges, like the funding challenges that you go through in terms of making work that's just sort of built not to last? And now you guys you have a dealer. I don't know. Do you have representation?
No.
No. So what are some of the dynamics of creating these ephemeral installations in terms of sustaining your practice? Because I mean, it's actually very ironic because paper is often seen as the easiest thing to sell, right? But you're working with paper in a kind of a contrarian manner.
I mean, I think that with us and Dominique having our background in DIY music, it really gave us the training to live a very simple, very low overhead lifestyle. And that is pretty much, I would say, the larger part of the battle.
Well, I mean, there is still if you look in recent history, there are a lot of artists who have ephemeral practices, who have, major representation. Think of Katrina Grosso or Phil DeBarlo, for instance. And Carl Black, for instance, where the role of the gallerist will be kind of a mediator, where it kind of advances our introduction within the institutional milieu. But also the objects that are issued from those installations, basically the refuse, or the remains, are things that can be conserved and reused or, put on the market, for instance.
I recently read that when somebody was talking about the art market in the 70s and basically how it didn't exist, and that Vito Acconci he went back and made drawings related to his famous performances so that he could actually make some money from his name. I'm just going to take a look at the time. Why don't we have about 20 minutes left. Why don't we open up some questions. Actually, one more thing that I wanted to ask you. Maybe we should keep it short because an hour is a long time to be gabbing. But in terms of working with paper, like working large scale with big pieces of paper, are there any kind of like behind the scenes, like interesting things that we should know about maybe how difficult it is or like the onerous qualities of like what are some things that might not be readily apparent in terms of like your process when we actually look at it, like some tricks, some secrets?
Well, there is, for one, there's not really a history or a method, I think, in what we do, where like, there isn't really like a lot of practitioners of putting wallpaper on the wall, where like, since we're all kind of sourcing our own materials at different places and paper stocks tend to react differently in different climates, and there's always this kind of level of, well, I'll bring this term again, improvisation in putting up the work, because you put it up with a starch or kind of a water-based glue, and it reacts weird, and it reacts different every time. So the level of manpower hours that are involved in putting those installation is it's crazy.
It's really fucking tedious.
In looming, for instance, the installation we had at YYZ in Toronto, there was 10 days of putting up this work, and
With us and a crew of 3 technicians.
yeah, 3 technicians.
But the large scale, like pasting on a building, it's just so exciting. It's just like it's a performance in itself. Like it's just pushing your own boundaries, your limits, your physical abilities, overcoming vertigo by operating 125 feet high cranes. You basically want to shit your pants. And having 3 assistants, like teaching them, like being a boss, like extreme weather condition, dealing with human shit, piss, oboes, drug dealers, pimps. It's really exciting because it becomes a real experience. You meet a lot of people on site, and I don't know this. I did a big project on St. Catherine. I wrapped a metro station, and it's a very alive experience, gorgeous experience, meeting amazing people that are not necessarily familiar with contemporary art, but are just have a really intuitive, genuine reaction. And this is for me a very special experience in doing large scale installation public art.
Thank you. So I think we're gonna just turn it over to you guys. If you have any questions for these guys, anyone? Yes.
Oh, well, it goes both ways. Yeah, we've been asked before, and sometimes, there's, let's say for the artist front center projects, that's often us who, go through the process of application, something that a lot of artists involved in installation practices in Canada have been doing. So, it depends of the context often, or the kind of project. When it comes more into, let's say, public spaces or stuff done outside, it's often our initiative, because a lot of those projects really kind of are out of the box. So, yeah.
Do you make money?
Well, yeah.
Well, we're the only installation artists on our gallery's roster, and I'm sure there's a reason for that.
But otherwise, in terms of a lot of like institutional situations we find ourselves. Let's say when we're in museums or regional galleries. We rely, and they themselves for their programations rely a lot on public funding. And I think this is what's great about a system like in Canada, where this opens up to a lot of practices that don't necessarily need the market to support them, and opens up doors for really, I don't know if experimental is the right term, but stuff that comes a bit more out of the box, and still gets articulated as contemporary art or artwork.
Do either of you get invitations to do? I mean, this is one revenue stream to do installations for like parties or like music shows or something.
All the time.
Do you say no?
No.
No. So you do that.
No.
Oh.
We say no.
No parties.
I don't think that being a party decorator is really very interesting as a practice.
I'd rather decorate swimming pools. Or, yeah, whatever.
So you would do it, though. What you're saying is you will do a swimming pool.
Well, it depends. Case by case.
Any other questions?
What? How did I? I've been approached last year by a curator to do a series of installation financed by the SDC du Village, which is the commercial organization that runs all the pedestrian segment of St. Catherine Street in the village. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else? Repeat the question so everyone can hear.
Have you think about using tails or something that is more permanent for this kind of installation?
Maybe in the future. I'm not there yet in my mind. But I tried to work with other materials, but I was really disappointed. So I'm sticking to paper.
Well,
Yeah.
to kind of draw an extension on that, the advantage of paper is, well, both cost measures, but also its flexibility, where more more permanent materials, you wouldn't, let's say, be able to produce this like kind of overstock that would allow you to kind of just react to the space you have to implement your stuff in.
Yeah, and also people would tell like, why didn't you do this on vinyl, for example? But the materiality and the quality, the pigments, the quality of the materiality, the cuttings, like all the marks, it makes it just more real, vibrant. It just doesn't come out the same way.
Well,
as
that's true in the
vinyl.
rendering of colors.
No, it's
yeah.
awful. It looks like dollar
But also,
store.
with paper, you can just react on the spot, whereas in vinyl, it's like, oh, okay, so you have to go do a drawing on Photoshop and then print it out, and then a week later you have it, and then you
And it's
paste it up.
crazy expensive. It's just impossible.
Economics. Sorry, if an installation would bring, is it? Sorry. I don't know about that. Well, I don't know. In a certain way, I'm kind of interested in the history that kind of facilitated the introduction of installation as a practice, because this is kind of a recent thing, right? Right now, I mean, I'm doing my master's studies at Concordia, and my thesis revolves around that a bit, where I kind of see a direct link with the cinema and installation practice, like sculptural installations. And you kind of see the history of both like following each other pretty closely. And it's especially true after the Second World War, where those things kind of gained a lot of steam. And then you actually saw installation as like something that an artist would do constantly. So in a way, I think our relation with space did change within time, and this just got represented in different ways, and installations was one of those. And that was informed with well, let me get to my point. So what I'm saying is, like, I think installation is relevant to kind of like our relations with like our different relations, different medias are going on today. I don't think it's bringing more people, but it does, like, I think it's a good reflection of kind of like new sensibilities, for instance.
Just one more question. Can you tell us anything about the sculpture outside that you made?
Oh yeah.
Who are those faces? What are they? What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Well, this work is. It's kind of a play, a bit. Well, okay. The intention was rather like more kind of focus on kind of our play with materiality and how, coming from our work with paper, how we could implement that. Those forms were. That's a kind of project we've been playing with for the past year, and we kind of got the chance to implement it here for this event. Where the shapes and where the images come from is we were kind of thinking of using, let's say, those human images, like the photo of a woman and a man.
Possible.
Yeah, those pictures are found out like from stock photos, sites.
Like the lamest, least interesting.
Really generic, and that was just to kind of add a bit of absurdity
The
to.
most basic.
Yeah, it was meant to kind of make it more absurd, basically. And so that kind of informed the whole action. Also, the choice of materials, and the kind of color choice was kind of relating to the site. The white tent, the black asphalt, and all this kind of just pulling links with the environments it's being set in, and it being kind of on this kind of weird incline, like kind of gravel kind of terrain, and kind of informed the kind of like makeshift looked a bit, and the kind of open, like the work shows its construction, like the strapping, everything's obvious, but still, there in this depiction there's like covering, like there's this purple vinyl tarp around the inflatables, kind of hiding the details. So it's a bit of play between tensions and like revealing and unrevealing and so on.
We really wanted to do a work that would be super ambiguous, because public art often just is like, a big sculpture plopped on a plinth or a mural, and we wanted to do something that wouldn't read as art, or would be just ambiguous, like formally, where is it finished? Is this something?
But yet would be still aware of its site of implementation.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. We just like to do weird stuff.
I think let's just end it at that then. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Yannick. Enjoy the rest of the fair.